I do not write for the sake of pluses or minuses, not to evaluate my writing talent or its absence. I do not claim to be a writer, and those who want to just spit in my direction, please do not bother with comments, as I am not interested. I just want to tell an amazing and mystical story from the life of one good man for those who are curious about it. I thank you in advance for your understanding. So, this story happened to an acquaintance of mine at the time of our conversation, and it was probably in 1997. He was about 74 years old. He lived a hard life, went through the war, famine, and difficult post. War years. He lifted the country out of ruin like everyone else, worked, and raised 2 wonderful sons. He was a kind man, not embittered at people, despite his hard fate. We called him simply Grandfather Yura. Once in a conversation, I, then a young girl, asked him, "Grandpa Yura, do you believe in God?" And he looked at me so meaningfully and said, "I don't know, girl. I think I do, but I haven't seen him, and what I have seen him. And what I have seen, I still can't explain. I have no reason not to believe in the truth of the story. Probably because I saw this man telling me all this. How at some point he had tears, and how difficult it was for him to remember it. How heavy and gray his eyes became. He looked somewhere through me, making long, meaningful pauses in his story. The following is on his behalf. I had just turned 18 when the war started. I was drafted immediately, and I was one of the first to see the horror with my own eyes. We were young boys. We were brave. Then it seemed to us that we would quickly defeat the enemy because our great country could stand up for itself. We went to the front cheerfully, even with some excitement. All in all, foolish, snot-nosed boys. But it wasn't as we thought. We really learned what war is. Death, stench, trenches, mud and lice, sleeping 3 hours a day on the wet, cold ground. Porridge, bread, and the battle. It seemed to me then that it never stopped. The German was coming so fast that we only had time to retreat, blazing our heels. From those guys, with whom I managed to make friends. In the first days, almost no one was left alive. All fell down. At that time, I could not understand it in my head. How could it be so? How could it be so? There was a man, and there was not. In my first month at the front, we got into an encirclement. Our situation was to hell. Our commander was a lieutenant, a little older than us, the same boy. But we looked at him like a god, and he was confused. He has to make a decision. And what does he know? Our only way out was through the swamps, and the Germans were all around, and we couldn't stick our noses out. We had a man, a Yakut of some sort, but his name was complicated, so we called him Yakut, but he didn't mind. He said that he was a hunter and had walked in the swamp many times, and if we listened to him, he would guide us. And what to do? We had no other way out, either to be shot or captured, which was worse than death, according to our upbringing. We got out for a long time, hard. We went through the swamp for 24 hours, and then through the woods. Almost a week, we went to our people. But we got there. We came out at last, starving, ragged, but our happiness had no limits. And then again, battles, retreats. I had been lucky before, alive, not even once scratched. In this fight, I was not spared. The wound was not heavy in the shoulder, but Yakut was well cut up. His leg was shattered. I dragged him, bloody and unconscious, from the battlefield. He and I ended up in different hospitals, and that's where it all started. I was sleeping, and suddenly there was a ringing in my ears, so nasty that my teeth chattered. It was not a ringing, but a squeak. I woke up, grabbed my head, and I had tears in my eyes from the ringing, and I see a woman standing in front of my neighbor's bunk. A beautiful young woman in a long white dress. Her hair was braided and waist length. She leaned over to the guy and kissed him on the forehead, stroked his cheek with her hand as if she was sorry, and she went to the exit. In the morning, I woke up and remembered the night vision and thought it was a dream. I looked at my neighbor's bunk, but the bed was made, and he was gone. I asked the men, "Where's your comrade?" And they said, "He died last night. We only noticed him in the morning." A couple of nights later, it happened again. I woke up again from this ringing in my ears, and there she was again, very close to my neighbor, on the right. He was heavy, lying unconscious, almost all the time. I looked at her, and she was a beauty of indescribable beauty, and her features were all kind of nice, dear. Again, she bent down, kissed him on the forehead, turned around and went to the exit, and then I realized that I could not hear her footsteps. The floor was wooden, even heard the mice running, and here it was quiet, only sniffing and snoring. I jumped out of bed, followed her, even wanted to call her out, but she vanished into thin air right before my eyes, as if she had never been here. I'm standing there, and I can't believe my eyes. I shook my head. Maybe I was imagining things, even patted my cheek. I went outside, stood there, smoked a cigarette. I thought I'd lost my mind. And in the morning, it turned out that my neighbor, who was kissed by this beautiful woman, had also died. After the hospital, I returned to my location, and the same night she came again, and all those whom she kissed that night were killed in the next battle. In general, I realized then that it was death, and somehow I felt uncomfortable from this thought. I am a Komsomol member, a fighter of the Red Army, and here is some devilishness. I didn't think to tell anyone and what I would say, and I didn't believe myself, and even to tell others. They would laugh. But one night, I woke up from a ringing, and in horror, I realized that again, I would see her. I opened my eyes and she was standing over me and looking at me, and she had such a gentle, warm look, just like her mother. I want to say something to her, but my tongue doesn't obey me, and I can't open my mouth. Well, I think it's the end for you, Yura, now that she's here. And I felt so sad. I remembered my favorite girl. I loved my classmate Lysenka. I couldn't even tell her about it before the war. I remembered my mother and father and my little sister. Tears rolled from my eyes, and I felt so sorry for myself that I would never see them again. This beautiful woman is standing there looking at me, and it seems to me that a whole eternity has passed. Suddenly I hear some singing from somewhere far away, like mooing and drumming, and I try to see with my eyes. I looked, and behind this guest, Yakut ours was standing and mooing and beating a tambourine, and he was wearing a strange outfit with some ropes and feathers and a strange tambourine. It seemed to me then that he looked like an Indian, as they draw them in books. The beautiful woman changed her face. She became frowning. Her eyes became serious. Her features became sharp. She turned to him and melted into thin air together with Yakut, and I was in a daze, but I couldn't understand anything. Why she didn't kiss me, where Yakut had come from. He was in the hospital, and what kind of outfit was he wearing? Did my comrade die? So I sat all night in my thoughts and wrote letters to my relatives, thinking for the last time. I went into the next battle with full confidence that I'd be killed, but no. That beauty didn't take me for some reason, and I fought on, even without wounds. I never saw her again. I began to laugh at myself, saying that the wound had taken its toll, So I dreamed it, and I made up all sorts of nonsense, like a superstitious grandmother. But fate brought me together with Yakut again. He recovered and his leg was still there, but he limped a little. When I met him, I was very happy and told him about the incident when I had seen him with a tambourine. I told him and laughed, saying, "You will see such things. I thought you were dead in the hospital." But Yakut was sitting there, looking at me with a sly squint, smiled with his eyes and said, "You should live, raise your sons, and for saving me, who was wounded at that time. I owe you a debt." I don't remember how much time had passed since our conversation, but one day I was awakened again by a ringing sound. I opened my eyes and saw her standing there again, smiling and holding my beloved Lysinka by the hand. I wanted to rush to her, shouted something, but they disappeared, dissolved. Then I learned from my mother's letter that Lysinka had died in a bombing. I hated her more and more, screamed, cried like in a dream, and she brought my father and my younger sister. I howled like a wounded wolf. I gnawed at the ground from the pain, but I couldn't get them back. My mother almost went mad with grief. My sister Gallia died of pneumonia in evacuation. She had a bad cold, and what kind of treatment in the war? Her mother buried her there, in a foreign land. My father died at the front. I found his grave only in '49. I met a fellow soldier who told me where my father was buried. My mother kept writing to me that I should take care of myself. If she lost me too, she wouldn't survive. How I hated that night guest then. But I couldn't do anything. Fate separated us from Yakut, and I don't even know whether he came back from the war alive or dead. No one knows from whom I've asked. I never saw him again. Only later, many years later, I heard about Yakut shamans. Maybe my Yakut was a shaman too? It was he who led us out of the encirclement through the swamps and saved me from death that night because I pulled him out wounded. I don't know, and he told me about his sons, but I didn't pay attention to his words. My sons saved a lot of lives. They're both doctors. The older one is a military surgeon. He was in Afghanistan. How many lives he saved then? And the younger one followed in his footsteps and became a surgeon too. And now I think, having lived my complicated life, maybe Yakut saw it then. Maybe he knew that my sons would save many lives and help many people. And that's why he pulled me out of the arms of that beautiful death. But she still took her own. She took my father and my sister, and my grandfather's in the war. And after that, in 65th, she took my mother. Tuyas, grandfather Yura, died at the age of 85. A quiet, peaceful death in his sleep in his house. Until his last days, he was in a clear mind and firm memory. He has 5 grandchildren. 3 became doctors. May he rest in peace, and God rest his soul.